It's 2:05 and we have a quorum, it appears. We'll call a roll. David Ahrens.
Sure.
Right. Let's see. Justice Castaneda, not present. Eric Upchurch. Eric?
He muted?
No, he was putting the sun down.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And Ron Trachtenberg, not present. Maggie Northrop is an alternate.
Here.
And she was here. And Rebecca, you're just an observer, right? You're not an alternate?
No, I'm not sure. I'm just a task force member.
Okay, John Rapsall present. So we have a quorum and we'll get started. So the approval of the minutes of December 14th is next on the agenda. First of all, I want to thank whoever is responsible for putting these together. I think it's John, for a very complete set of minutes on that last meeting, which I imagine was quite the task, so thank you. But nevertheless, are there any changes or corrections? Do I hear a motion?
Move to approve. Move to approve?
Yes, I heard that. Is there a second? Yes?
Okay, second. O'Neill.
So, any further discussion on the minutes? Not? All those in favor of approval of the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Next item, are there any members of the public who have either registered to speak or who would like to speak at this time? Address the subcommittee?
Grant Foster registered. Nothing to say at this time.
Okay. And any disclosures or recusals? Welcome, Justin. Okay, hearing none, I will move on then to, for the purposes of discussion, do I hear a motion to suspend the rules and stand informally to allow for public discussion and engagement on any agenda item?
Suspend the rules.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes carried. All right. We come now to item 5, which, welcome, Ron.
Thank you. Sorry, my watch is 15 minutes off.
You're early.
What?
We are just at the point of actually continuing on item 5 now. At the last meeting, we moved the discussion of item 5, which is on the structural and procedural issues relating to equity and meaningful engagement of residents in council decision-making to this meeting for the purposes of discussing alternative ways of participating and engaging in council decision-making. And I think what I want to try to do is focus on procedural and structural changes that address to make it easier for people who know and want to participate but have difficulty participating, rather than on engaging people who ought to be engaged but don't know about it and aren't inclined to be, which is a whole other issue, and I think that will be taken up by the committee and the task force as a whole at some later time. So focusing really on the council, we may touch on BCCs on this matter, but I think really focusing on things that the council can do at their meetings. And I think I had asked, it was a long time ago, but I believe I had asked everybody to give this some thought before they come and maybe take a look at the City of Austin's engagement task force, which made a lot of recommendations, and I gave you a little summary sheet of my quick summary of the things that jumped out at me, and be prepared to discuss some of the top things that you think the City Council could do to change it so that people can participate and be engaged in council decision making in a way that more encourages them to do it without making it a huge burden. So Anybody like to start with saying what they thought, like their 1, 2, or 3 things that the council ought to do to change the procedures?
Well, let me take the easy way out and look at the technical and IT
Okay.
solution here. It's part of the solution. Only recently, as in certainly the past year or so, have been able to really use Legistar in a fluent fashion and feel comfortable with it. And I think there's still other layers of it that I don't know about. But I think for most people who don't spend all their times on apps and software kinds of stuff, it is very difficult. And there's, to find an agenda, for example, on a committee, what's happening at a committee, you have to go through about 3 layers of stuff to finally get to today's agenda. And that's just, you know, I don't need a map about how to get to CCB. I think that's the issue for most people. But you're looking for things like an agenda or items that are related to the agenda. Legistar really needs to be accessible. That's one thing. Then it's the interactive part. There isn't any. So once you find something that you're interested in, a particular item, there you are. And you know, you're for it or against it, but there's nothing you can do or say that relates to it unless you sort of work your way back to committee members and even on committee members. Last night, I was looked at the Parks Department, Parks Commission, and only half of the emails were there. So there's no way to get in touch, even with half the people, if you wanted to do that. So there's just many, and I'm sure everybody else, Rebecca is really good at Legistar, and but I think there are many different problems with it, but one is just how to use it, how to make it more accessible, and how to make it interactive, because there's nothing, I don't think there's anything that's interactive.
No.
Yeah, there's nothing that gives you as a means of getting feedback or conversation or more information or any of that.
Okay. How about other council members? Anything more to add on that particular subject?
I mean,
Yeah,
that would be awesome if you could click on an agenda item and it would just start collating comments from people and collecting, I don't know if the software could do that, but if we could build something that connects to Legistar that does that.
Where does
That would be-
Legistar something out of a box? I mean, is this something that we've done, or?
No, this is a software.
This is a
Purchased.
software
It's
that
used
many,
in
many
other-
other
okay.
governments
Some other
use.
governments use.
Yeah.
It was recently upgraded, so that's why it's probably a little easier to work.
Yeah.
But
But yeah, I mean, the only interactive thing is the email, links to the email addresses, but that's, like you said,
If they're there.
if they're even there for some people, yeah.
I know Lisa has a lot of experience with, do you have any understanding on some of the other options that might be available from the company, et cetera?
They do have a comments module that I believe the county has utilized and has found that people don't use it. So just to let the subcommittee know, we are going to be putting out an RFP for legislative management software. So we're going to be looking at, getting people's comments, looking at what people are need. So it would be helpful if you can kind of capture what you just talked about, so that we have some sort of a record for when we start to look at creating the RFP for a new legislative management system. Now, saying that, it still may be Legistar, just because of what's out there. It's not there's not a lot of robust legislative management systems. There's some that have some really cool features, but there's not one that has that capability of providing all the information that we want out there. I think it's cumbersome. I understand, I know people find it cumbersome to use, but in terms of being able to keep our data, I mean, we're more concerned about, internally, about how do we keep that information available to the public versus the old way where you would have to call the clerk's office and ask, where can I find this? And then they would transfer you to the department. And then the department, the person would need to say, well, let me see if this person's in so we can get you this information. So really when we looked at the legislative management software, we were looking at a way of being able to present that publicly so we could start not having all those barriers to get to that information. Now I do understand there are some clunkiness, and for me personally, I've been using it since 2005, so I'm pretty well versed in how to use it. There are some other features online that I sit down with other departments because they're always curious, how do you use it? How do you find the information you're looking for? There was a request from Council President Balde to actually have that session with alders.
So Lisa, I would suggest maybe you look at that City of Austin engagement study. There are a couple of software pieces that are mentioned in there, and the Salt Lake City is mentioned as a prime kind of community engagement. Mm-hmm. I have not done it, and I haven't looked at it, I don't know, but it was mentioned in there, and so is the agenda commenting system, which I don't know if that's an add-on, I don't know if that's Legistar or whatever, right. But I mean, I think there are other cities that are looking at or using software that allow more engagement than Legistar.
And I think, from our perspective too, particularly with the City Attorney's Office, we want to be able to make sure that that is a public record and available to the public. So there's always that added layer. There's a lot of cool add-ons, modules out there that you can comment on, but trying to maintain that record sometimes can get difficult.
Brian, did you?
Yeah, two things. One, a lot of systems have post-it type notes where if you're looking at the material, you can post a note to whatever the subject matter is. And that's one interface that Lisa was mentioning. The other thing is the State Law Library runs, like every month, they run a class. And I'm always getting advertisements, do you want to attend our law library class? And it's basically how to use their systems. So not that the clerk's office doesn't have enough to do, or the city attorney's office doesn't have enough to do, but whether or not we sponsor periodic classes and how to use Legistar. I've always had people calling me, how do I find out this bit of information? And I lead them through it. And once you're led through, you kind of intuitively figure it out. So anyway, that's a suggestion. Maybe you have the clerk's office have periodic classes that are noted online, or you can sign up for online or something.
Yeah, so it's not limited only to Legistar. I think we're talking about technology, is that correct? Mm-hmm. So the other thing is that there are a lot of other interfaces now where if you go online, there's an option to chat with somebody. The city side does not have that. I don't think, I've not been there, and then I get an option to chat with somebody. So I think having that option will make it easy. So I know we are working on the 3117. We may possibly have a chat option or something like that. But I do think if the city side can have the possibility of, if I'm there and instead of picking a telephone and calling somebody, I can click on something and chat with somebody, and maybe that person can direct me to resources or something like that, or have a conversation. If you're on the tab that talks about council, then maybe that chat goes to the city council staff or something like that.
Okay, question for you.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about the 311 thing here, have we?
No.
So, could you tell us a bit about it? Because that's a separate thing that's happening, which involves public information, but we haven't, that's actually in the works.
Right.
We haven't broached that subject.
So, yeah, basically, although Claire, who left the country and myself, it's been working on this 311 center thing. So, and we are working with the IT department to see what is possible. So right now, I think they're at the RFP stage where they're sending, I think requests for information or proposal or something for people to respond and tell us exactly how they think this should be set up. So the idea is we may have a physical place for a 311 center where people can pick up the phone and the calls goes to that place, but also to have an online presence so that if you, and we want to roll this maybe department by department or a couple of departments at a time, so that there are experts to answer this question. It's not enough just to call and then somebody say, I don't know where to direct you or something. So roll it department by department or chunks of department by department, so that as all the departments are rolled in, then the expert is also going along with it. So that is the idea of the 311 center. So like I said, I think just last week or so, the IT department sent an email that they'll be doing the RFP soon, things like that.
Lisa, have you been involved with them in terms of the city council being part of this?
The 311?
Yeah.
I think what is out there is the RFP to hire a consultant to start looking at different 311 systems. So it's just hiring a consultant. If anybody's been involved, it would be Quasi.
I just want to add a few things about the 311. I mean, essentially, it's everything but emergency. At some point would be the goal of at least most of the systems. But I think a very important part that I've heard discussed as part of that is also some sort of way to track this stuff too. So adding like a ticket system of some sort, for a better term, so when things come in, you can actually see what the life cycle of it is. And I think that would make a huge difference with a lot of stuff that goes on if the council was able to use some sort of tracking.
Everything except for emergency.
Essentially, I mean, it's
211 is for general information about programs. 311 is for municipal services. 411 is for information in the region. I mean, they all have reasons and designated, right? So the 311 would be specifically for municipal services, right? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so basically that's why we are hiring a consultant to tell us exactly what can be done, what do we already have that we can leverage to make sure that we put the system together. So as that comes through, we definitely know exactly what all is involved in it. But basically is to make sure that we have one central point where every resident of the city knows this is where I have to go. So an example of when we had the flood, it was difficult to know who do I call, what do I ask when I call, or something like that. But if we say like anybody who has an emergency, 911 is the place to call. So anybody who needs the city should know that 311 is the place to call, no matter what happens or something. I think once we get the experts to be engaged, then we will know exactly what the details are.
John, there's a...
Can I say something here?
Yes, Eric.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm appreciating the discussion thus far. I'm wondering to what extent we want to have input here, and I mean, are we giving some pros and cons or ideas about what that technology should look like? And also, if we are, regardless of the consultant that's hired, I think it's kind of funny that, as a city, we always rush to some expert out there somewhere when we got people here that use the service and have input. Is there some kind of a initiative or some part of this consulting that will engage the people who are using the service and the people who are struggling to use the service, and also the people who don't use the service because they don't know about it?
Anyone who's familiar with the system or the
doesn't
process
exist
used
yet.
to do the RFP? Have a comment? The 311? I think that's what you're talking about, right, Eric? The 311 system?
Well, I'm talking about Legistar.
The Legistar.
Replacement, and also the 311 thing as well. Just what's the public engagement so that we're getting the users and potential users input.
For the 311 center, it will just be like any other initiative. It will definitely reach out to stakeholders, but also people who are potential consumers of the service and things like that. So that will be there. As far as the legislative thing, I would assume the same process will follow if you have to do an upgrade to the system.
Yes. There will definitely be a community engagement process for that.
John, can I make a...
Yes. All right, Eric, did you hear the answer? Could you hear Lisa's answer?
I didn't hear Lisa.
Just-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lisa says that they will follow a public engagement process as part of the RFP before a contract's awarded.
Well,
Maggie.
I had a quick proposal for you guys. Since we suspended Robert's rules, can we invite everyone at the table? Because I think there was a question back there that we didn't see, and Lisa, you seem to be a big part of this conversation. We can scooch a little bit and make sure that we're all.
Sure. Problem. Wherever you're comfortable, you don't
I'll go
have.
by John.
No one needs to sit at the table if they don't want to.
Right, absolutely. If you don't feel like you don't have to.
That's not in Robert's rules. Thank you. Justice.
Just procedurally, so right now, what we were brought, so this, the agenda item is about structural procedural issues relating to equity and meaningful engagement of residents' common cultural decision making. The thing that Alder Aarons brought up was the issue with Legistar, that it's not easy, Legistar, and that it's not easy to navigate for everybody. And then an answer or mitigation strategy that Council President brought up was this 311 system, right? So I just want to make sure that that's where we are. So we're just talking, is this one issue, right? The negotiation of Legistar is one issue that has to do with engagement and making sure that we have equity and engagement in municipal processes. And I think it's a big one and an important one. But it isn't, you know, before we go down into the, let's talk about the details of the RFP for the contractor that's going to come out to do the 311 services. I just want to make sure we're, you know what I'm saying, that we're, there are many issues about engagement and about equity and engagement that I think we should tackle, whether it's today or at a subsequent meeting.
I have a suggestion, though, that we really stick to input into the council as the main topic, because if we get into a general 311 discussion, it's much more wide-ranging, with a lot of people who should be at this table who aren't. So I say we stick to the input into the council processes.
And I think before you arrived, that's what I tried to say we should do, is try to stick with that. And yes, we got into 311. All right, are there any, sorry, go ahead.
Great, thanks.
You had a comment, you've been waiting and I couldn't see you in the corner. So
That's
go
great.
right ahead.
Yeah, 3 quick suggestions that I don't think would require a new system. One would be similar to our subscription model right now, where you can sign up for snowplow alerts or engineering projects or parks-related news to be able to basically subscribe to the council, just in terms of meeting notices or any of the commissions. I think would be really helpful. And just basically get onto that distribution list like you can now if you go and track down and find the administrative person that manages that group. The second would be to have calendar invites that you can just sort of download and export like you can in most other scenarios, so that if you say, I want to have all of the council meetings on my calendar, you can click a button and add them to your calendar, and then that they're also kept up to date if there are cancellations or changes in locations, etc. And then the third would be to, I think David made the point, having an easy sort of one-click button to send a message to all of the members of a body to not have to track down individual emails and have some missing. And I think all of those could be done with current technologies.
Thank you. Can we move on then to any other ideas that somebody wants to discuss?
So,
go ahead. Okay.
So also,
Go ahead.
So the other thing is, I think, not always, but many always do have blogs, where you can send something once in a while. I think if that blog can be enhanced to an extent that if David, for example, posts something that I want to make comment to, that can go to everybody, or just go to him and say, this is what I'm thinking, so that way he's also interacting with me one way or the other. So I think that also can be done with current technology. If you're talking about technology still, a lot of young people particularly are on Facebook, Instagram, or something like that. Just like we have blogs, can we create Facebook for either individual orders or the city? That can be complicated how it is done, but I do think it will increase engagement. So those are options that are out there.
I think the 2 big things, adding a little bit to the different technologies, I think Nextdoor is something that I see a lot of people using. I know the city has looked at that in the past and had some issues with it. I don't know if anything's
There's
changed.
also a lot of people who sign up for it and then disregard it.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, not to go back to the 311 thing, but I do think it is very difficult if you're a resident to make sure when you have, to very much have a ticket, to make sure whatever you're sending in is actually either being looked at or followed up or being routed to the right place. And so I think something like a ticket system would be a game changer for people being able to submit feedback or get things taken care of. And I call it a ticket system because I'm an IT guy, but some sort of customer relation management software that makes it so if a resident is engaging about a traffic engineering issue to an alder can open up an issue and assign it to somebody in traffic engineering and see where it is and get updates. The resident can do that online. And there's a great company in Madison that makes ticket software that I think at some point we should engage, which is Zendesk. But something along those lines of being able to do CRM, customer relation management, with constituents, I think would really change engagement.
Yeah, if we could. All right, Justice.
Eric, did you have some? He jumps in earlier.
Yeah.
Yes, and nothing to all the.
I was going to say that we're getting down to real details on this now, and I think the important thing now is to note that there's a lot of improvements that can be made and leave it to the experts to actually work on the implementation and the details of the program. Does anybody want to bring up a different topic of things we need to do?
Yeah, it was brought up at the last meeting. But this idea that alders are only, so this is a little bit more, we're going into the BCC conversation, but if we have over-representation by specific aldermanic districts on boards, committees, and commissions, and alders are only responsive, or they only should, they're responsive to their constituents, and if you have a situation where it's constituent, so I have an issue with things that are citywide, and we talked about this, and we gave the example of development projects at different parts of the city, that if I have an issue with them because they affect me as a resident or a citizen of Madison because we share the commons, there is no real incentive for alders to listen to me. I don't care what the medium is. So next door, I can text them, Facebook, whatever. There's no, and so like that is a structural challenge for equitable engagement of our elected officials, is this idea that it is based on constituents that are geographically defined.
I just want to say that with regards to that, personally, I don't know the rest of the others, but when I hear from my constituent, it don't matter where the issue is. So I'm on the east side. If you contact me and you are in my district about an issue that is at the west side, I still treat it just like if it was within my district. That's how I deal with stuff. I don't.
I emailed you about residents being displaced. You never even responded. When I sent that to you and Alder Carter, you didn't even respond to me. And I said there was a whole bunch of residents being displaced in a district that wasn't you. You never even responded to me. No. So this idea that this is my point, is that you can say that anecdotally, but in practice it doesn't happen.
Guys, you're talking about the opposite. You're talking past each other.
Okay.
So let me.
Maggie, it's been waiting a long time. Yes.
No, I was just. Well, should we resolve this before I can?
Yes,
because my question's a little bit different.
Yeah. So Justin, I just want you to let me know when. I was out of town.
I'll email you the thing. Is justice is my
You guys were talking about the opposite. You were saying that you respond to me even if I have an issue on the west side, and he's saying I live on the west side and have an issue with the whole city, and I emailed you.
Right.
Respond. So you guys were talking about the opposite things. Yeah.
I'll send you the email right now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then the other thing that I wanted to add to that was also we had the CCEC meeting where we talked about the possibility of the council meeting around the city. I don't know if that is part of how we can reach out to constituent members or not, but Rebecca said he did say something with you, she did say something with you. So just wanted to bring that up also as a tool for interaction or something, or at least
we have had discussions about whether the council should meet in various locations or whether they should always meet downtown at the same time. And I don't know that that was resolved, but we certainly identified it as a potential issue.
And we did the just to make sure that it got it, because I didn't see it, but the issue that we talked about with the 3-minute speaking time, just so we can, the logistics example that we gave, that if you take public transit, so just think about this. If you're gonna, let's just pick 2 neighborhoods that are kind of at the periphery, so let's just pick Teresa Terrace or Kennedy Heights. and you're gonna take public transit to come to a meeting for the city council, how long it takes, so 45 minutes on transit. Now you gotta get childcare. So for each, so 45 minutes to come down here to wait for your agenda to come up for 3 minutes, so that the alders can like ignore you and talk and do all this other crap that they do, and we have residents that come out and talk to them at the city council meetings. Then you gotta get back on public transit and get back. That's like 4 hours of time to come down for 3 minutes. So like that's another thing in terms of equitable engagement that we talked about. I didn't see it in the thing, but that was a real thing.
So what were you proposing, to make it more than 3
Well,
minutes?
this is what we were saying, is that that 3 minute thing is,
John, could you like watch people's hands?
Yeah.
Going up, because
Yeah,
we're trying to
so
raise
the
our
one,
hand.
yeah. So actually, my suggestion and what I wanted to talk about is directly related to what Justice was just saying. Why, or what are the barriers to us setting up conference video calling from residents into common council meetings so people can actually speak about an issue via conference?
I don't mean that. I believe some cities actually have like neighborhood centers. Boston, I think, has it, where you can attend the.
But not from your own home.
No, and you may be able to do it in the own home eventually.
Okay.
But at least in the interim, if you have neighborhood-based conference centers where people can watch the common council meeting and people can register to speak on topics and speak from that neighborhood center, you know, at least as an interim step, that would be maybe more feasible and easier to implement, faster to implement.
Because we have waiting rooms now on conference calls where you can put people in queue and they can sign up, they know when they will come up. So I was wondering, are there any legislative
I just want to point out, former Alder Brenda Kronkel can speak to this as well. We have early public comment on the Common Council agenda for people that have transportation, childcare, or medical issues that can speak before anything else happens on the council agenda. That occurs as the first thing on our agenda.
It's still not enough for a busy parent.
So, right.
Or the
It doesn't
situation-
address the
Right,
situation.
but
situation that Justice.
And I'm just going to throw this out as the other side of the slope. We have a council rule that alders are not able to participate and vote via conference call. So if we're going to start letting residents participate electronically, the council's going to have to discuss, does that mean alders can participate electronically
Well, they
as
should be
well?
held to a different standard than
Okay.
residents.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, I think
Okay.
that'll be thrown
Legitimate
out there.
question, it's legitimate.
Rebecca, is your hand still up?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, it was,
That's it.
it was basically,
Okay.
why can't we do that?
Any others? And we're
But I would
really-
like, I would like the city attorney to respond.
Yes, please.
What?
To Manahidi's question of what are the barriers? Are there legal barriers for,
The biggest are technological barriers. I don't know how to do this, I don't know anything about it, so I don't know how well it works. I don't know what you're gonna get if you add another 50 or 70 people who wanna make a comment at a council meeting, every time there's a meeting. And I know this group has talked about separating the public input and the legislative parts of the meetings. But I don't think, particularly if you can keep a record of it, either a transcript or even the actual video, that there's any legal problem with allowing people to appear by virtually. Yeah.
But I believe the city of Austin has a procedure, which I thought was a little overdone when I looked at it. But you register ahead of time and you give your comments ahead of time so that they can be packaged for the council or something like that. So that they go to a library, they can do their video from the library, and they have to do it in advance rather than live at the meeting. But that's just one way of at least managing the information as it comes in.
So we're putting in that data, yeah.
And I do think there's a big difference between having members of the public being able to submit comments virtually and members of the body participating.
That's true.
All right, any other topics? We also have to talk about our final report, so I'm trying to limit these discussions to identification of issues.
Recapping what we talked about at the last.
You know what, people were supposed to think about the alternatives. We didn't really discuss alternatives very completely. So we're talking about alternative ways of participating in meetings of the Common Council or getting information to the Common Council, which are not being utilized now, which could be. That's a good way of summarizing it. And in particular, we were looking at least some of the things that were identified in the Austin study, but we're not precluding from better creative ideas that come from the city of Madison. Anybody else? Sure.
Yeah, just someone mentioned the issue of sort of if you're a resident of, and speaking with other alders. So I think especially on the transportation realm and speaking of sort of this system public right-of-way, I think there's absolutely been a sort of understanding of projects being first and foremost about the sort of geographic center of where they're at. And I think there are structural barriers to input from residents that don't live, especially adjacent to that project, for example, both in terms of information. So, and some of these processes are hopefully improving with our transportation department, but even getting notice. In the past, that was only via a postcard if you were on the hook for an assessment. So you wouldn't even necessarily know that there was an informational meeting coming up. And then this other question about sort of how much because of the way that alders are elected, how much value does a comment hold for someone who isn't your elected official? So I think there is something to that is a structural barrier to participation.
Thank you. Alderman Ayers, one of the things that you brought up, which I don't think we discussed very fully, but was the budget process, which is a particular kind of process that takes place in the city of Madison. Were there any creative ideas or suggestions that you or anybody else had in terms of the budget process that would be more engaging of residents before it was done?
I think that's an issue that's not structural necessarily, but it's really personality or how people do business. I just want to recap about, I think the main impediment to public participation is how long our meetings go. I can't emphasize that enough. And how basically unstructured they are. At our last meeting, not to pick on Alder Revere, he started off with about a 10-minute goodbye to a staff member. And I think for people who are waiting, and we've had this before, this feedback from constituents before about the whole tribute piece that we do increasingly and how long that it takes. And how long our speakers, I mean, I think that we're more of the problem than the public is. I mean, maybe if we had, virtual records that are being made, and we had to watch, 50 of them, that would be hard and not really realistic. But I think that we're the problem. The council is the problem. Not only do people speak 3 times, but again for Mike, 18. I timed it. It's 18 minutes, and that's just a problem. I mean, if everybody, Mike doesn't speak often, but when he does, it's a long haul. And but for other people, it also is an issue because part of it is there's 20 of us. So if we really have something that's poignant and significant to the entire body, if we have 15 people, do the math. That's why we're there till about 5 in the morning. And we have nobody, the only people who are left are people who are being paid to be there. So if this is a big construction project, then, you can almost name the names of the people who are going to be in the listening section of people who are being paid to be there. So for them, it's just click, click, click. But for everybody else, the TV set goes off. Who would be up till 1 o'clock in the morning to watch these half the council is asleep. So I think it's a tremendous barrier, not just in terms of people coming there, but listening, as well as our own capacity to function. I don't function then, and so that's a big. I think it's the main problem. So getting back to Justice's person who's taking the bus in from Kennedy Heights, forget about it. I mean, if that person is actually going to be sitting there, I mean, they're going to have to wait till the morning for the buses to start running again to get back home. It simply becomes out of the question.
So is this a council rules issue and not important council
It's
rules?
both. I mean, there are rules pertaining to, what's the rule for council now?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? 10 minutes?
You have two 10-minute ones on every item. So add it up.
Oh, yeah.
If every council member talked twice on an item for 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's 4 minutes.
One AM.
Other council?
I don't share your opinion that it's the biggest problem we have. I don't even think it's that big of a problem. We're a deliberative body of 20 people from across the city, and we deliberate. And when I engage in debate, and I'm sure you feel like when you engage in debate, you're adding something to the collective decision-making process that you feel really needs to be added, that people need to hear. And that's just democracy. It's long, it's inefficient, but it's the only time we can talk to each other openly because of open meetings laws. And I would much prefer to have long meetings than to have deals made behind closed doors untransparently beforehand so we can have more efficient meetings. I would much prefer that. So it's a couple different perspectives on that. But I do think there could be things done with agenda setting and improving how we get public comments beforehand, such as all the things that we've said, so that doesn't take up our time to deliberate and debate with each other. And I think I had, and additionally, to get those comments on record, on written record beforehand, so everyone can see what those comments are.
John, I just wanted to say on the county board, they don't do honoring resolutions for retirees. They recognize people that have been there like 25 years or whatever, and they do it once every year.
A year, and have
And
special.
they will come but they don't do retiring resolutions. I think it's, and we do honoring resolutions. We do a lot of them. A lot of different reasons, and not just retirements. But I just want to throw out that
it's selective.
Right.
It's very selective. It's people who are close to department heads or close to a council member.
I think that the task force can leave that to the council.
Yeah.
I think we don't need the help with that.
We don't have any machine
I have a structural suggestion, though. I mean, the council meeting starts at 6:30, and all these things end up getting moved to 6:30. It might be worth considering, starting the meeting for those specific things at 5:30 or 6, and saying that, the regular meeting is going to start at 6:30, and if you're doing honoring resolutions or stuff like that, you have a half hour to do that, and you define very specific rules for that, so it doesn't carry on for an hour or hour and a half, people making comments about, either somebody retiring or, a particular thing in the news that we're recognizing. And so that when somebody shows up at a meeting at 6:30, they know that the meeting is going to actually be a council meeting that they can relate to. I mean, I know, I haven't been around that long, but obviously I can't imagine how a resident would have felt listening to these retiree speeches, because they have no idea who these people are. This is a very, small world. So you're sitting there listening to these tributes going, well, thank you for your service, I got it, now can we get on to business? And I do want to make a comment about the early comment. I think it's unfortunate. I'm glad we have it, but I also do think it's much more productive and much more helpful for the people to actually be able to stay for the actual item. And so to make early comment is great, I'm glad it's there, but we do want to try to at least get the meeting going so they can be there for that. So that would be my suggestion, is that you move some of those things that are non-business related, you give the council the opportunity to still do it, but you do it at a different time period before the meeting, and so when somebody shows up, they know they're showing up for the meeting and not that.
Brenda
had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You started off by asking about the budget process and if there are structural things that could be done. And I think part of the problem as a member of the public, the amendments come out on Friday at noon and they're voting on Monday. And that means that there's like very little work day time to find out information about things. And that process is really condensed, really fast at the end with a lot of new things coming up, and as a member of the public, it's not easy to follow. And so I do think that there are things in the budget process that can be changed and maybe made to be more understandable. Some people have begun to understand that most of it happens at the Finance Committee, but that's what this council, other councils do it a little bit differently. So I know when I was the council president, wrote some resolutions about trying to stretch that process out a little bit, and I know there's always a lot of pushback because people want to be done by a certain time of the year, but I think that the budget process, moving the capital budget way up, sort of helped a little bit, but it still is that rush at the end that makes it really difficult for the public to follow along.
So, just going back to Rebecca's comment, or Alder Kimball's comment, I think that a lot of what Alder Aaron's brought up, I see those as symptoms. And I think that they're important. I don't know how to rank them in a way that would make any sense, but but I would go back and say that the structural issue that has to do with representation and equity and voice goes back to this idea that we have these geographic districts. This is a city that is one of the most, if not the most, segregated city. I mean, Milwaukee, Madison, you can do these things. It's extraordinarily segregated, and it has been because of historic housing segregation. How do you mitigate that? We're seeing this with our council, with our boards, commissions, and committees, that these districts that have historically not allowed people of color to own property in them or live in them until our lifetimes are overwhelmingly still represented in terms of citywide decision making, and they are not, right now there is not structure to make those alders beholden to anyone's voice but their own constituents. Honestly, we have elected officials. I'd like to trust it, but the thing is that we don't have a way right now with 20 aldermanic districts in a teeny city to have 20 of these things that are broken down geographically. Things that affect me, where I live on the east side, are things, the east and west side are not that far away. In many cities, they would be in the same side because it's such a small geography that we're talking about in one side. And we showed this when we looked at the other city examples, that if you look at the geography of where other cities, larger cities, San Diego I think was one of them, where you look at the geography that those alders are representing, it's like bigger than Madison and it's one alder. So the point is that the things that are affecting things that I would say are the commons, which is, I would say our environment, our natural resources, definitely our school district. There is no reason, and our alders on in different geographic districts have no reason to listen to what I have to say if I'm not in their district. And so ultimately we elect these folks. If you guys want to, I agree with Alder Kimball, you guys should sit in there and have that time to debate, and if you guys want to spend the night together, that's great. And that's why we have representative democracy, because we elect you. But the thing is that we don't have a way in terms of the overwhelming representation of the city, especially in neighborhoods that have historically been segregated, and there has not been access, or populations that have not had access to political processes and institutions. There is no way for us to actually have any weight. And this, to me, is the problem. And I think that is what I would say is the biggest problem here. Now, all these other things start becoming symptomatic, because then the only way for me to get my voice in is to show up to the meeting and go through all this stuff, because otherwise there's no way for anyone to hear what I got to say.
Question, Eric. I don't remember whether you supported the idea of making larger districts with fewer alders and having and also having some at-large. Would that answer some of the questions you're talking about, or mitigate it?
What I would say to the city attorney's question is something that we all have to grapple with as a full committee, is that these are wicked problems. Because, yeah, I think that would address something, but it would create other problems. Right. So, I don't know that there is a good or bad answer. I would just say that these are very complex. But yes, to a certain degree, having some semblance of an at-large representation, and I think we heard this from a lot of the mayors also, who said that they have problems with the alders who take a district approach, and then there's this trading that goes on. Now, I don't know that other than I heard people say that, so I don't know examples of when that happens. I would say that maybe our
One
elected
mayor
officials.
said it.
What's that?
One mayor said that.
No, Sue Bauman said it too.
Pardon me, so, yeah.
Okay, that's all.
All right, there was, I thought
Or
I had it
something.
right.
Yeah, I just don't think that necessarily that our large districts or at-large elections are the panacea. We could just easily have a 10-person council with all 10 people being west of the state capitol building too. That could happen. And if I have a very large constituency, I might not listen to you because you're just one small little voice in the city, where if I have a confined district with a smaller population and you're in my district, you may have more of an impact. So I'm not too sure that at-large districts are the panacea. You think they may be. They could create other problems just as bad.
Rod, I'm having a hard time because I just told the city attorney I don't think it's a panacea. Second of all, I think what you just said is a straw dog argument. I mean, yeah, if we had all at-large districts, all the dogs' noses could fall off. You're right. I don't know what it would look like in a hypothetical sense. I will say that the way it is now actually prohibits representation from a significant swath of our population, primarily folks of color. I do know that. I don't know.
See, where I disagree, here's where I disagree, with all due respect. When I was on the...
You have a different perspective. You don't understand my argument, but go ahead.
No, I think I do.
No, I don't think you do.
When I was on the council and on the plan commission, I listened to, and I'm on the board of directors of MDC. I'm chairman. I listened to people on the housing issues. And I didn't care whether or not it was an east side project, a west side project, and I didn't care necessarily that a specific neighborhood, whether it was one of mine or one of somebody else's neighborhoods, had a specific impact. I'm just telling you, you're painting a lot of alders as blithely ignoring citywide issues and just being district-oriented. Now, there are some, maybe, and I think there are some, but a lot of alders take a much more citywide approach than you're giving them credit for.
John? So I didn't hear him talking about particular alders, and I understand, and I try hard as my personal approach to the job to be like that, but what I hear Justice saying is that it is a structural issue because the incentive, it's not about the people who are elected, it's the incentive structure is the districts. I mean, that's where we get our votes, is from the districts. So it's and people respond to that differently, but I think it is a legitimate issue, and we're gonna grapple with this, with our pros and cons for different recommendations, but I think it is a legitimate point, and especially in transportation issues, as we're gonna deal with, flooding stuff, these bigger issues. It really is, it does impact how alders vote and think about things, just structurally, no matter how good our intentions are as individuals.
I was very interested in Mike's, I don't know if it was a proposal, but just a suggestion about bifurcating council meetings from, as they do in the legislature, a legislative hearing on issues, to do the hearing part one session, and then we have executive sessions on a separate night. I don't know. What do people?
I know that's one of the things listed in here somewhere.
Yeah.
The city of Sun Prairie does a lot of their work as a committee of the whole. And they're public, I'm not saying Sun Prairie is perfect in a lot of ways, okay? I threatened to sue those guys once. But anyway, they take a lot of their public comment in the committee of the whole. The council is more reserved for the deliberation. Whether that's bad or good, but it's a different format.
I thought the sort of separation of the honoring resolutions, that sort of stuff out sort of made sense, or kind of moving it up. I think one of the risks of separating the public comment from the deliberation is, and that's probably one of the best ways for actually influencing decisions, is when or right before the council deliberation is to hear people, especially when a number of people show up and they're passionate and they're making their case. I mean, as I watch these meetings, decisions are definitely sort of part of the moment, and I think that there would be a risk of having less impact from the public if it were separated from the deliberations.
Although that may also be a negative if you only have a certain constituency that shows up to meetings and then others are responding to that immediate input right before that and not thinking beyond that group that's more vocal.
I do think there's one thing about having meetings earlier with certain items is it still requires a quorum, and so all the members are going to have to be there. And that makes it even more burdensome than it is now. Does it make the meeting shorter so that it compensates for that? I don't know. But I'm just saying, if you're going to have a meeting, you got to have quorum. And so even, you could create a subcommittee probably that does the hearings, but I'm not sure that's fair to the people who have a comment to make if they're going to be, effective in their public comments. So there's a lot to be worked out on that, but I think we've done a lot to identify this as an issue to be addressed by the council. We're not supposed to solve the problems here. We're supposed to identify issues and then leave it to the task force to, I guess, make recommendations. So unless there's more on that, I'd like to see if there's any other major issue that we have to talk about.
I just want to, so what we're saying, again, the structural thing here is that.
I got something.
So long as the in-person, so long, I mean, because we've discussed it, very similar to at-large, et cetera, that there is, the time of day thing is, it will work for some and never for others, and that will always be the case. So the thing is, though, is that what we're identifying is that having the in-person requirement to be able to engage with aldermanic decisions inherently is challenging for a lot of people.
Eric, I think I heard you saying you had a comment.
Yeah, I did. I apologize. I ended up getting another call and I take that. So I missed some pieces, but I have been able to listen in here. And I wonder if we have already talked about, in our last meeting, we talked about the need to document and be able to track interactions between alders and general public in order to be able to show that objective input and get out of and get past the interpretation of the alder, and then also the different modes of participation. Did we talk about the need for folks to be able to participate remotely in these kinds of meetings? I mean, this, for instance, this right here, I'm glad that we were able to notice this 24 hours at least in advance, but, the nature of having the need to call in versus attending physically is because something is coming up, you know what I mean? So I think so I'm wondering if we had already talked about that, participating in other ways, albeit remotely, and then also documenting input, using a system to document participation and communication between alders and general public so that we can clearly see where some of that, so that information and that input lives somewhere and can be counted on the people.
We did talk about those in terms of technology, possibility of a platform that would allow that to happen, and we also did talk about remote comments and perhaps video attendance. So I think we did cover that and note it as an issue.
Right.
All right, so if that, we're going to come back and talk about these things later. I think we've covered most of the major ones, unless there is anything that somebody thinks is a major issue. On number 5, yeah.
I'd like to mention one thing.
Yeah.
On the state system, I can go like to the Walker report, and I can find out what major, not the Governor Walker, it's a different Walker.
The Wheeler report?
What?
The Wheeler report.
The Wheeler report, thank you. But I can go there, for example, and find out what committees are meeting and what bills are going to be heard, all in one document. So, for example, if I go to Legistar, as I understand the system, and at least I've been using the system, I can bring up the week's calendar, but there's no way for me to click on, like, transportation and see what items are on the legislation agenda for that week. So it'd be nice and, am I wrong?
You can't do it in one click. That's what people said before. So you click here, then you gotta go here. click
Yeah, that's
there,
right. No, no,
and
that's
eventually
right.
you get to the actual agenda.
But it'd be nice if we had something like the Wheeler Report, where basically, or something that you could go to the week's calendar and easily transport to what committee or what legislation you want to look at, or find out exactly what legislation is going to be. You may know something's coming up, but you don't know what committee is going to handle it. So it might be something, if we've had something like the Wheeler Report, you know, as a format for the average person to look at and try to figure out what's happening.
Well, there is, I mean, Legistar does, you can look at, you can pick this week's list of meetings. Of course, it has to be a committee that's in Legistar, like your subcommittee is not in Legistar.
It is after 4 clicks.
Right. But that's through the city clerk's, that's through the city clerk's online calendar, is where you get that. But there is a way to see a list view of meetings. You can make it into a calendar view, so you can see the whole month and see what committees are meeting for the month. You can sign up if you're trying to follow a piece of legislation. You can create an account and then sign up for that particular legislative file so that you'll be alerted whenever it's on a council or a committee agenda. So there's a lot of functionality within the online. Is it smooth? Is it like intuitive? No, it's not. But like Ron said, there probably could be classes. I mean, I've worked with other residents that have wanted to know, how do I do this? And so I've done like screenshots and created a document and sent it off and said, here's how you click here, click there, and you get it. But there are different functionalities within the online portal that I think people just aren't aware of and aren't able to use. In terms of voting records, or like you were talking about meeting calendars, we don't have the ability to export into like a Google Calendar or whatever. Internally in the database, we can create like a PDF that lists all the meeting dates for every committee. So if I wanted to know Finance Committee, I just want a PDF, a list, I can generate that. I can internally generate the votes for council members. I recently had a request from somebody wanting a couple of the candidates that had been on the council, their voting records. So I can actually just go in, click their name, do a council meeting, and then just pick a date range and generate a PDF of that. So there's a lot of functionality internally. There's functionality externally that I think people just aren't aware of.
Okay.
Also, Wheeler Report is a private paid subscription
Yes,
service with a lot of resources.
And I understand that too.
Yes, one last comment on this?
Great,
Okay.
yeah, just to this point, I think the other issue, even if you reduce the barriers of the sort of user interface side of it, particularly for the committee and commission agendas, they are often not clear about what is actually being talked about. So, it might say as a line, engineering updates, and there are 2 specific projects. And so even if you get to that agenda, it really requires significant interpretation and information that is not available anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think that issue of having more meaningful agendas is going to be a prerequisite to then navigating to that agenda material better.
I agree with you.
Okay.
And also, to loop around back to BCC topic of discussion and potential proposal, if we decide to recommend the establishment of an Office of Resident Engagement or Community Participation and fund that with staff, that could be a function of that office to do trainings in Legistar and to build out some of these systems for the public, and for BCC and council members.
Okay. I think we better move on to the next topic, which I hope we can. We've spent time talking about this at BCC committee.
Speaking of training.
Speaking of training, and we discussed it about the necessity for training, and we've also heard about if you offer training and they don't come, what do we do about it? Is there anything more that we should be discussing on training at this point, other than to indicate that people, whether they're on a BCC or whether they're a common council member, need some training in both procedure as well as ways to engage citizens and residents?
I would only repeat what I said.
I have some thoughts there.
Okay. Let Mike finish and then Eric.
I was just going to repeat what I told the committee yesterday, which was that staff has got a meeting scheduled to go through and sort of revamp the training that we do now. And we're going to be doing something on that, but I think getting this committee to get behind pushing that more would be very helpful as we move on. Our biggest problem is that it's never been a requirement. And we've debated whether you can't be chair of this committee unless you come to this training. Well, then guess what happens? The person says, all right, find yourself another chair. Yeah. So anyway, but I just to give you that piece of information, that's all I had.
Okay. Eric, do you still have a comment?
Yes, absolutely. And
okay.
I think that actually is a good connecting piece. Place-based participation is clearly a barrier, and for obvious reasons. And for that, one of the things that we advise clients to do is to take a look at on-demand trainings that are pre-recorded, which is, of course, it's a no-brainer, it's an easy thing, but it's still something that I don't really see, and maybe I'm just ignorant to the presence of those things. But on-demand trainings on particular issues that are coming up as common questions that we have, and then also regular online trainings that allow people to participate remotely as well would be beneficial. And these also could be open to the public so that the public can be able to tune in and understand a bit more about how these structures work, which could lower some barriers that way. In addition to the process pieces, and let me know if I'm going too fast, but there's on-demand training and then online training that are open to the public. But in addition to process training, what I'm finding is that some of these folks who get into office or who decide to participate in committees, although they may be passionate about whatever the thing is that they're working on, they may not necessarily have the interpersonal skills to navigate the relationships and to participate in a team of people that are passionate as well. And so I think that some general professional development or personal development would be beneficial here as well, even if it's just training on relationship building, communication, conflict resolution, and my favorite would be mindfulness, some form of self-reflection that has been shown to improve collaboration and productivity. But definitely being able to offer these on demand and also online available to the public is a key piece for any topic that is covered in the training.
Thank you, Eric.
Are we talking about the council training or the boards and commissions?
Yeah.
Well, we were trying to talk about just council, but
okay.
Yeah, but
I mean, on the council, right, address the council training.
Yeah.
I think again, how to use Legistar becoming have some facility with it. The second part is I found it took me a long time to figure out the council agenda and what is happening and what is resolutions for the future, for the current, things that have been discussed, items, just what the overall structure of the thing is, and how to adequately address it, as well as issues concerning the consent agenda. So, and why some things are on the consent agenda, extra majority and so on. So I think those two pieces of the puzzle are important.
This is for those of us who haven't been around enough to know in recent past, how is the consent agenda established? Is it established by the president and council, or the
Lisa creates the subcommittee. She decides those things which should just be passed by a voice vote, and those things which.
Right, and that actually has grown over.
Where have you been all this time?
I don't know.
I'm not running for your job.
That document actually was never intended to be what it is today. That document was actually created at the request of a council president because what was happening was people kept throwing notes at them and kept, doing all this. And they said, Lisa, can you just organize this for me? And so that's how it started out. Well, then over time, it's morphed into this bigger thing, which is kind of a consent agenda exclusion list, which a lot of people use to say, oh, do I need to stay for this meeting? Staff was like, do I need to stay, and did they pull it off to talk about it? But I always say at the top, things can be pulled at the meeting, so this is not the end-all, be-all, but it's kind of more as a working document to kind of work through the council agenda and used mainly for the purpose of the council president to move things, but also to alert the other alders that maybe there's going to be a substitute introduced from the floor. Maybe there's a new business item that's going to be introduced from the floor that if I didn't put that on there, they wouldn't know about it until somebody actually moved it from the floor.
It's the actual agenda. I mean, we get the 40-page part thing,
Yeah.
and then we get the 2-page, right?
Yeah.
One page here.
I would describe it this way, the consent agenda is created negatively.
Yeah.
You start with the proposition that everything on the agenda is going to be approved on one vote without doing anything, and then you start pulling things off. Okay, you have to have the public hearings, so they're pulled off, because you have to do that. These items are supermajority. If we don't approve it unanimously in the consent agenda, then you're going to have to pull that off. Then there are the ones where alders have contacted Lisa and said, I want to talk about this item, this item, this item. They get pulled off. If anybody shows up at the meeting to testify, it gets pulled off.
It's the non-consent.
Yeah, it's really the non-consent, it's the exclusion list.
It's an exclusion list.
Yeah.
It's the routine business list sort of thing. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
If you're going to do training, one of the items of training should be is the city department structure. I think that some alders, at least when their first day, have no idea of the city departments and and sub-departments and who do you contact if there's this problem, or if I wanted to do this, who do I contact to try to frame the issue and frame the resolutions or ordinances and may cure the problem that I see but really don't exist. So, I mean,
Ron, it's changed since you've been on it.
I know it has. Oh, it has?
Yeah, they used to have all the departments come in one night and go through, and they'd be there from like 5 o'clock at night till like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. Every department would present. Well, it's been changed, and it's been council president kind of manages that process. When Denise DeMar was council president, she switched it up where we had an all-day retreat and really focused on the major issues that new alders had to be brought up to speed, Judge Doyle Square, some of the economic development things. And she wanted to make it more robust than what it was. Typically, we only have a 2-week window.
I know.
Because of when they're elected and when they're sworn in. After new alders are sworn in, it's very difficult to get them all back together because they're serving on their committees. And really the only dates that are available are Fridays and Saturdays. And I try to stay away from Sundays. But typically what we try to do in that first couple of weeks is get them in with the city attorney to talk about ethics, open meetings, public records. Then we get them in with the finance department to start talking about the budget. And then after that, we try to schedule the department reviews where, like say, Public Works comes in. That's engineering, parks, streets, and fleet services. So they have one night where they do their things. Planning,
Can I just?
Yeah.
We don't need to hear the whole.
Okay, well, I'm just saying
it's done, right? I mean,
right. I mean,
it's done.
Right.
You just don't want long enough.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So I just want to point out, I mean, because I think what Ron is saying, I think is a good point. And I think and I don't know what this thing looks like, because it's something we've floated in a few of these, but this Office of Community, this idea of that concept, where it isn't a one-time, you have to sit there until doing the errands, we'll call it the errands, when it starts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and goes till 4 in the morning. You don't have to go through that process where you have that readily available. And I'm just thinking about it, and I don't know where this all fits, but we had a number of golden moments in this, or what has it been, a year already? But one of them was when we asked that question about who does the chief of staff of the council respond to, and 3 people responded at once with 3 different answers. That was my favorite. It was like, okay. And 2 of them were city council, were alders. So this idea that we have this position that is nebulous in terms of its reporting structure and the way that that thing works, if you think about the resource allocation necessary for those things, and you thought about a way to create something that actually had the capacity to orient new alders or new folks that came on, I think there's a lot of merit to that. And so just thinking about that, because I could understand how if that's the only way you can figure out all the departments by going through a real quick 12-hour, long session, I think that could be very hard for some folks, to maybe retain some of that information, right?
Well, and just to be fair, Crazy is out of the country right now, but he has been looking at this and is working with council leadership. But I mean, this is my list so far, and one of them is to have a mock city council meeting. Where we would have a mock city council meeting, mainly because we have so many new alders coming in. Because it is very confusing. Before we would do, they would meet with the council leadership to run through the council agenda meeting that night they're sworn, after they're sworn in. And that's really not enough time, unless they followed council processes and been to council meetings. It's very unfamiliar, and it's like a shock to the system because it goes very fast, very quick. And they're like, did I vote on something? But it would be nice to just have a mock city council meeting where the new alders can just sit through, current alders can come in, but just to run through that so they kind of understand the process. Because I think it is a shock. Yeah, it is.
One idea is to maybe just expand the thinking around a training program a little bit beyond the sort of initial, week, 2 weeks sort of thing. So there's some real limitations to adult learning capacity, and pretty much in any scenario you're going to get filled up pretty quick. So I don't know if it's ever been discussed, but some sort of a more formalized kind of mentorship program seems like it would be really important. We're doing that.
We do have a mentorship, alder mentors.
Yeah, I think this was mentioned in one of the former alders, one of the interviews I heard about training on meeting facilitation, community meeting facilitation. I think if you don't know how to deal with community meetings, which I think there are plenty of alders that don't, when they get in the job, it'd be helpful to understand how to facilitate that kind of meeting.
Okay. So now we'll go on to the discussion of the the preliminary report that we have to give to the task force on the 16th. And I have to really thank John for getting that and putting that together in draft form for us. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at that?
Okay.
Yeah. We're here. We're here. Okay.
I had one suggested change on page 3. That I just looked at ahead of time. The first thing where it talks about, at the top of the page, whether we do membership on a common council as a job or a service. I'm not sure that quite captures the distinction. I thought, do you view it as a government job or a volunteer public service?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I noted in here the 24-hour notice for members to appear by phone. I don't think we're going to be reconsidering that in the open meetings law.
Maybe that should be changed legislation.
The open meetings law should be updated.
Yeah.
It doesn't recognize any of these new technologies.
Right, right. I don't think that,
It
that
can't be
that
litigated
it's not a
in
reason not to comment on how it does it, right? Facilitate.
Mike, we were talking about a system, in technology where, there could be discussion of issues online by citizens. And then some people started talking about aldermen adding notes to that.
Right.
And what raised the question was open meetings law. Even though everything's in the record, everything's open to the public, is that still technically a violation of the open meetings law?
If one alder comments to one citizen, no.
Okay,
But
but
if you're talking about these chat rooms,
that's the point, that's where I'm getting closer.
where 4 members of the finance committee happen to be on there talking with citizens about issues, then you start to have problems. And that again, this is why the state open meetings law was drafted decades ago, and they didn't think about any of these things. And we lawyers have to constantly try and adjust what's going on to what we think the law really means in today's world. But that's where I see some of the problems.
Okay.
And the other issue you have, there was just a ruling out of, I think, Tennessee or Kentucky. Facebook pages. Some mayor or some elected official had his own Facebook page where he'd invite people to, send comments. And then people would send comments he didn't like, and the mayor would strike them, throw it off the Facebook page because he didn't want that. The court says, you have what's here, you have a public forum. You can't violate people's First Amendment rights by picking out what they say and what they don't say. So there are just a lot of, that's why when you guys started using Facebook, I was a little bit concerned about folks who were doing that. Anyway, these are the issues that you have and that you have to watch. I'm convinced you could take testimony remotely from citizens without causing a problem as long as you could keep some record of it.
Any other comments on the,
On this.
document,
Yeah,
preliminary report?
I just feel like we.
The issue that I raised of late night meetings isn't listed.
Is not here?
And I think having a forced adjournment at such and such an hour would allow public participation.
I thought that was here, but.
The other part is,
Where do you think that fits?
Well, it's
Is
one
that
of
under
the-
this page 3? That
yeah, it's one of the
okay.
laundry
Yeah.
list here. I think
You know the history of this, don't you?
the adjournment, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Got it.
yeah, I did.
Okay, we can add that in. Is there any other deletions or additions that we want to make to this?
Well, it's adherence to some of the existing rules. And I think that's a problem. Some people speak for a very long time, some people not so, or brief, or some people, we have a rule application, and some people not. So I think just generally, in adherence to rules pertaining to the council.
That's it's the council, and that's in your own hands. You can
Okay.
do that
Right,
now
I
if you
know.
want.
Can
Well,
anybody
about good
raise
Well,
a
actually, it's the
point of order?
Well, yeah, that's the come.
We don't time calls, which maybe we should start to do.
Yeah.
We're back.
So I don't see anything about a potential office for community participation. And I think that maybe under number 5, or either add it to the list under.
Was that something we talked about at this committee?
No,
or was
I think
We
that
talked
at
about it
CC?
today. We
We
talked
did,
about
oh,
it
we did talk
today.
about it today. Well, this doesn't reflect anything we talked
So
about
I'm
today.
just saying, you know, let's
Okay.
add some of the things we talked about
Okay.
today as alternatives.
Oh, yeah.
Potential improvements under number 5. Including, you know, a number of other things discussed
Mhm.
prior to that.
The other, I mean, we're on 3, the list on 3, something that's come up and we just discussed it. Another meeting is moving the council to have occasional meetings elsewhere, a west side meeting, an east side meeting. So, not, you know,
Mhm.
constantly on the go, but just some meetings.
We brought up a number of times about this representation thing having to do with geography.
Yeah, that's front and center here, it's here.
Yeah.
Where we're talking about right here for the bullet, the formula.
No, this one,
No, I mean, I get it, but this is just.
negative impacts of parochialism.
I'm just talking specifically about engagement of residents. That bullet.
Oh, so, you know, the history of this is this was produced before today.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
we don't have today's conversation captured here. And John will do that, and I assume that we can distribute this in advance, and if you see something that isn't on there, let him know before it gets to next week's meeting. But,
Or maybe you could just read them now, it's in his notes.
Because you're reporting out
Yeah,
yeah, on the next week.
on the 16th.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, in advance of that meeting, if, when John does his draft, he sends it to all of us, and we can give him comments before it gets finalized to send.
Okay.
You know, in the way that we have to do that. So not, we can't have a discussion, we have to give it to him.
Man, I made us vote on ours.
yeah, but John,
Well,
I mean, John's a
well,
good note taker.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we just let's hear
For
what.
purposes of these particular bullets, the way, when I went back through all the minutes to try to formulate this report in conjunction with what Eileen was expecting at the 16th, if you look at 4, those first 3 bullets were things that I identified in the minutes as general themes that were discussed. But as you recall, in the minutes, they were mostly, it was about pros and cons. I didn't discern from the minutes any direction in terms of alternatives that people were moving towards on those issues. But on this issue of meaningful engagement, there was a clear list of alternatives that were created, which was continued today. So these bullets were really meant to kind of capture those specific engagement alternatives. There's not obviously anything related to, any alternatives related to number of alders, geographic districts, those kinds of things, because I hadn't seen in the minutes or heard in the meetings any specific direction that the subcommittee was going in. So I can add something like, add those within the context, but just wanted to make sure that these bullets are related to engagement.
But there were, you know, like, considering the comments module for Legistar, classes for
Yeah,
Legistar,
so,
like all those
I
things.
mean, I could add all these that we
Yeah,
talked about
right,
today.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you should. And remember, we're not asked specifically to make recommendations yet. That's for the task force to do. So we were supposed to identify issues and alternatives, but not necessarily come up with recommendations at this point yet. So, and I think we did certainly talk about geographic districts, and we talked about at-large districts, and we talked about hybrid models. They're all alternatives, and we listed the pros and cons. But I don't even think today we reached consensus on the fact that we were going to recommend the elimination of alderman districts. So,
But we have consensus that we did talk about these things.
but we did talk about it.
We did talk about these things.
Right. So I mean, I
You're
think
just going
John's
to eliminate District 15.
Yeah.
And we don't have to worry about any late night meetings.
So I'm just, if I were in John's position, I would have a hard time writing something that we could vote on and approve today without him giving it without having a little bit of thought and, you know, striking things out. So, I mean, to me, the only reasonable thing to ask him to do is that he prepared this as a draft in advance of that meeting. If there's any glaring things you think he missed, you write him in that comment and he'll add it. If he doesn't think he missed it, then you guys can have a dialogue about it, or whoever. But we can't, under the current city rules, have a draft put out and then all of us comment and copy each other on it, because then we have a meeting. So, I don't know how else to do it expeditiously, if someone's got an idea.
Well, the way we did it yesterday.
Well, I'm just saying, we voted on it, but
Yeah.
but we don't, it's longer list and the drafting is harder, I think. If you can do it, great.
Well, I mean, I can read this, and you can tell me if it's what you want.
Also, and just in addition, based on what we were just saying, so on number 6, the first issue that subcommittee has found particularly difficult, that they want the whole task force, I would add, on that first bullet point, add district versus at-large.
Sure.
Or hybrid, district, at-large, or hybrid.
John, what's the agenda for the 16th? Are these items going to be voted on at that time?
No, not, at least that's not how I do it. It's just the report that's going to be received.
It's an update.
It's just an update.
I was very careful to not use the word report on this piece of paper, same as the other one. It's just an update.
Okay.
So that's my understanding of what Eileen wants on the 16th. It's just an update that would create a discussion on things that might help the subcommittees continue to do their work.
Maybe look at some direction or anything to see.
Yeah.
Right, and then the idea is that we're gonna have these actual full reports but done by March.
But
Right.
and they may or may not look anything like,
Right.
It was, you know, as it was conveyed to me, it was supposed to be more of a bullet point update as opposed to a narrative report.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, you know, there's a lot of overlap between the committees and the people who are attending, so I only can assume that most of the people who are attending the task force meeting will know what's been going on.
Yeah, there's like 8 of us here today,
Yeah.
out of 11.
Yeah, so, you know, talk about not being able to get a quorum. Very well. Okay, so, Justice, are you asking that John read those comments to us to make sure that he's copying everything?
I mean, it's your committee, sir. So, no, I mean.
I gave my
I don't know, I just feel like that way
He'd
when
have been
John.
done reading if he'd read them already.
Well, I'm just saying, if John, that way if you go up there and report these things, then it's all of us acknowledging that this is what you're reporting, so it is in essence on behalf of all of us that you're speaking, and I think that's fine. But, you know, I don't know.
I think it's easier, we'll just send it out. If we totally miss something, let us know. If it's pretty close, I think that'll be good enough for right now.
And the author of it is the city attorney's office.
Right, blame the city.
Just, can I ask
Or the
if you
chair.
included the suggestions that were made by non-task force members, such as ticket system, comments on blogs, one-click message, calendar invites, subscriptions?
I think I've almost seen it. We have a pretty long list here.
Okay. Now, next item on the agenda is the future meeting dates and topics for discussion. I would like to set the dates of the 18th and 25th, which are the 2 subsequent Fridays at the same time, same place, for meeting dates, as well as February 1st and 8th. If we don't need them, we don't need them. But I think we're going to probably get some feedback, and we also have some other items to discuss. I think one of the items which we have not really focused on was the mayor's office and the mayor's interaction with the common council. And I'd like to schedule that maybe as the next meeting on February 1st, if that can be done. And I would like to have somebody from the mayor's office present to discuss that.
They're usually here.
Well, they didn't come today.
So, does that be, the minutes of your last meeting had some discussion about the mayor's office? But
But
it's
a lot of
primarily of questions.
Right.
So you'd like to have somebody from the mayor's office who could discuss those, essentially, and others that you may have. Okay.
Unless there are people who feel differently about that.
I feel like we should bring it back to the task force, for the task force, because this is common council, we have the BCC. We didn't really have one on the mayor's office because we just dealt with that one question right up front. So let's talk about at the task force how we get that discussion done. Should it be assigned to this committee or that committee, subcommittee, or should we just deal with it at the task force instead of heaping more work on this committee right now?
Or asking them to do it twice, or more than once, just
Right,
because a lot of the
right.
questions that we're asking about appointments to the BCCs also would be, in essence, questions. Or
It's
things that
appointments
relate.
and staff, the mayor's staff.
Right, oh, yeah,
Those
staff.
are the two main things. And let's work that out at the main task force meeting, who does what.
Okay. Any other comments on that? Otherwise, we'll take that as the direction and takes a little burden off of ours. Okay, so is there something that we have pressing in terms of topics which we've missed so far that we haven't just at least made one pass over? Or outstanding? No?
I think that the issue of these Donald Trump memes needs to be a serious. I don't have.
What's that?
He wants us to talk about Donald Trump memes.
Oh.
Perhaps at a later date.
Okay.
John, I just have one thing I just was going to hand out when we were talking about Alder training, that Oklahoma actually has this nonpartisan initiative to educate all citizens interested in seeking an elective office. So they actually have a program. It does cost money, but I thought, you know, it's kind of good to look at. Well, you know, I just thought it was, you know, just food for thought when you're thinking about,
Sure.
you know, we talk about how do we get more people to run from different constituencies, that, you know, this is kind of something that's out there, and, you know, because there's a lot of information to process when you're in Walder. And they list a lot of the stuff we'll be covering.
Yes.
I guess in a little bit of a similar vein, maybe expanding the thinking around education to be for people that might be considering running. I think especially in the context of sort of and maybe it's just an off year, but the number of people that are not sort of fulfilling the 2-year commitment, and you know, that could just be personal things that come up, but I think getting a better understanding of what the job actually is might be beneficial to the operations of the council once people are elected.
Okay.
Sorry, I
You
have
okay with that?
4 o'clock meeting on the north side.
Okay. Any problem with the meeting dates that you want to say real quick?
Oh, go ahead.
No.
Where are we at?
No, we're still talking about meeting
I got nothing.
dates and topics that need to be considered in the absence of anybody having any additional comments. I think it might be worthwhile for us to go back, since we have to now get to the point of doing the final report, of going through these topics and considering whether we've learned anything more when going through it, like you were talking about today, you know, the geographic districts. You seem to be stronger in your feelings than you were when we started.
I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and we've
Yeah.
been looking, well, because the geography thing, and let me just say this, just for the record, some apparently did respond to me, went to my junk email and that email, but I want to prove that it made my points, because what the issue was that I was responding, there's 20 families who were displaced and made homeless overnight because of flooding in the middle of a heat spell. And no one was doing anything, and it weren't anything related to anything I was doing, and I just found out about it, and I sent it to him, and he sent back an email saying, I got your email, and that's it. And okay, so nothing was given, no alders, no one did anything. I had to sit through these things and find 20 families. It's not what I do. I mean, we do have a housing component to our work, but I don't do homeless services, and we got no support from any of these elected officials, and it wasn't in the district I lived in, so like, that's my point, is that there is no citizen engagement. And like, he sent me an email saying, I got your email. It went to my junk. So my apologies for insinuating that he did not respond. He did. Yeah, because I've spent some time with them. The geographies, when we started looking at those cities, San Diego, I think, comes to mind because they have 8 city council people for a city of 1.7 million people. And I looked at some of the geographies and how big those districts are. Now, I'm not saying it's the best city. I'm just saying that the idea of the size of the district being untenable is not necessarily a showstopper. It's just a thing that, yes, big districts would bring different challenges. I'm not gonna lie, I think all these things are very complex. I don't ever want to reduce it. In all due respect, I don't think that it's panacea. I don't think that. I do think that what we've been doing is not working, and it has never worked. And so I don't think that having a marriage or being totally dogmatic and saying, well, we gotta stick to what we've been doing because we've been doing it is necessarily best practices either. So all I'm saying is that I think that just having some time to really look at some of these, hopefully all of us have been able to really dig in to a lot of the items that we brought up and explore.
Can I actually be more specific when you're saying it doesn't work? I mean, as far as I can tell, we have a city that's functioning.
This is the worst city in the United States in terms of educational and economic outcomes for people of color. And it has gotten progressively worse. And we've had a number of people who have been elected and all this stuff over my whole life and prior, and it has gotten worse. So that's what I mean.
Thank you for being more specific.
Yeah.
Just to, when you've sort of been through this a few times, I think having at-large members would, Ron was kind of extreme in his comment of, well, I could wind up with everybody just from the west side. But as I mentioned in an earlier meeting, that's exactly what happens in Janesville. It's very bifurcated, Janesville, east and west side. And east side is wealthy, west side is old Janesville and poorer. Every member of the city council is from the east side. Maybe it would happen like that, maybe not, but I think looking at vote issues such as two issues, voter turnout, and it's something that you've often mentioned, how the distribution of membership on boards and committees, it's very stacked. As I think I've mentioned before, the voter turnout in Sama's district is 1/3 of the voter turnout in District 13. Well, who's going to get elected in an at-large seat? Probably. I mean, people in 13 maybe feel like they want to have somebody from the far east side, but most of them don't even know where it is. You know, I mean, they go to the airport.
So I return to that. I don't know that having all of it would answer, and I don't debate that, and we talked about it here, that it's probably, it's well documented that a lot of what dictates or determines political participation is very much related or a function of class. And then you can throw in access and voter restriction, a lot of these other things that are kind of used to kind of push that. There's no debate about that, and I get that. But what we're saying is that is there something to be said about having more than just geographic districts? And what would that look like? And what would happen even if you made them bigger? And I don't disagree with anything you're saying, and I don't disagree with what Ron's saying about it not necessarily being the answer to all things. I don't think that. I just think that there is something to be said about exploring that, because if this is the issue, and if we are seeing that there are a very small number of blocks, basically, in the city of Madison who have overwhelming representation in citywide issues, and this is the results that we've gotten for a lot of folks who have never had access to it, I think it's worth exploring.
And I think NLC does a great little write-up on, at-large, district, and hybrid models. Just a short write-up on it, which I found helpful. But the more I hear about the hybrid model, I mean, it would be interesting from my perspective, personal perspective, is to have, if you wanted to look at a hybrid model, call up a municipality that has a hybrid model and ask them how it's working for them and what do they find, what are the pros for them and what are the cons. For me, it's always beneficial to actually hear somebody that's actually doing it. than, you know, reading something about the pros and cons. But it's actually more interesting to me to actually talk to the people that are living in that system. I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, I know.
We did have all the discussed.
Yeah, no, and I think the point is, though, I mean, you know, there are plenty of cities that have just alders like this that don't have the same issues that Justice has discussed, so.
To the severity that we have.
Right, to the severity, so it doesn't necessarily, so, you know, I think if we can find communities that have done a good job of, you know, being more equitable, and by changing their council, I would love to hear about that and how they've done that. I think that would be really, really valuable, but.
So, if I could propose something, and I don't think that Eileen would particularly object to this, particularly in the second stage of this, is that if we go through these in kind of the topic areas that we discussed, maybe a little bit more concentrating them on the agenda, and have this, that we come up with the things that which we as a group have consensus on. And just rather than making a recommendation, you know, the consensus is we need to do this and we need to do that. There is no consensus on whether we should have geographic districts or automatic districts or whatever. And go through it and use that as a way of furthering the discussion in terms of our final report. Does anybody think that's a bad idea or a good idea?
I think it's worth it. I think that even capturing a lot of what we did with the plus delta or the pro-con or however we put it.
Yeah.
Because there is nothing, I think everything, any one of these things, we've discussed a number of things that would create some monsters or could potentially create some monsters. And so just having that information, but I feel at its core, such is the nature of this work, right? There are no, this stuff, and I don't think that there is a single nail about a lot of the things that I bring up and that I've spent, I would say, a good over a decade now just focusing on in terms of land use zoning in this city in particular. I don't think that there is a single nail. And if it was that easy, we would have already solved it. There's too many highly intelligent folks that have been involved in municipal processes over the life of the city to say that there's one thing and so all we got to do is fix it. I mean, there's many, many things that are layered and they become symbiotic and morphed. And I would just say that, yeah, I think by doing that, we could explore some of those.
Yes, Mike?
I'm just wondering, trying to remember what the items of consensus were.
Well,
we have a city.
There is a city. Yeah. There's no brats at street corners anymore.
I would say that, for example, I think we pretty much reached consensus about aldermanic terms.
Oh.
Didn't we? Some people raised some objections, but I think in the end, the consensus was pretty much that 4-year terms for alders was a good idea.
Okay.
Didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to, it's not finalized, but the point though is that there were a couple things that we did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And 2-year terms for council president? Did we do that?
Yeah, I think so.
Only District 15.
Yeah, but I mean, it's good to go through all these things again and see if we have consensus, because we might have had consensus at one point and then somebody said something, realized something, and it's not anymore. So I just, having these general discussions again about these things that we've already discussed is not a bad idea, with the idea of checking off a list of things for which there's consensus on.
That will help structure the report.
Yeah.
And I think even with recommendations, it's possible to have consensus around the negatives. So, you know what I'm saying? So we can suggest everyone should wear yellow hats, but we also recognize that that may or may not, that is not necessarily going to address a lot of the issues with representation.
Yes. It would make life easier for council members, and I think you've got to consider that.
All right, so we'll notice, we'll look for meeting dates and we'll reserve all those dates that I gave for it. If we reach the end of what we need to do to write our report before that time, great. But I think we would aim to have ours done by March 1st and presented at the, ready for presentation at the meeting of March 16th of the task force.
Just a warning, because we haven't looked ahead, we don't know for sure what dates this room is available. We may be somewhere else.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, just don't assume that we're going to be here.
That's going to be adjourned? Why was he looking at you?
Because I always go to the municipal building. This new building we got over there. We're over there here for a couple weeks.
Hey, just a question on the test.
He moved to adjourn.
Oh,
second.
yes. All in favor?
Okay, now I want to know why TFOGS is not sensitive to geographic areas.
We have been.
We have been. We
You
moved all over.
had 5 on the north and east side, 1 on the south, 7 downtown, and 1 on the west.
Good point.
Why aren't we having any over in my neighborhood?
We're gonna do it at Lisa's house.
Good Shepherd, you canceled that meeting.
We got a
My residents the residents in Meadowwood are,
What about a good tavern?
you don't have, unless you want to go to,
We had one.